Please, I have to see him. Let me see my husband. Get out of here! You are not welcome at this funeral.
Please don't cry. I know this is hard, but I promise you, your life is about to change for good.
They dragged her out of her husband's funeral while rain poured from the sky and her baby cried in her arms, telling her she had no place there, no home to return to, and no inheritance to claim. What they didn't know was that before he died, her husband had quietly secured a $2 billion fortune, hidden beyond their reach, protected by secrets, and meant only for her and their son. And before the rain stopped falling, everything they thought they had stolen was about to slip through their fingers. Welcome to True Love Stories, where we share interesting and intriguing stories. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Do not forget to like and share, and now let's dive into the story. The rain began before dawn. It fell in thin, steady sheets against the tall windows of the mansion, tracing trembling paths down the glass as if the sky itself could not hold back its grief. Inside the master bedroom, she sat on the edge of the bed, her black dress draped over her knees, her infant son cradled against her chest. The house was too quiet. Just 3 days ago, it had been filled with voices, doctors rushing down hallways, urgent phone calls, relatives arriving with rehearsed expressions of shock. Now there was nothing but the rain and the faint, uneven rhythm of her baby's breathing. Her husband was gone. Even thinking the words felt unreal. Her fingers tightened around the soft fabric of her son's blanket, as though if she held him tightly enough, she would not lose anything else. A sharp knock broke the silence. She looked up, startled. It was barely 7 in the morning. The funeral was scheduled for 10. Another knock came, harder this time. Not a request. A demand. She rose slowly, her legs weak from sleepless nights and uncried tears. As she opened the bedroom door, she found her mother-in-law standing rigid in the hallway, dressed in severe black, her expression carved from stone. Behind her stood her husband's older brother and 2 aunts, their eyes cold and assessing. "We need to talk," her mother-in-law said flatly. She nodded faintly and followed them downstairs, still holding the baby. The living room felt unfamiliar, as though it no longer belonged to her. The family had rearranged themselves on the couches like judges at a tribunal. Her brother-in-law cleared his throat. "There's something you should know before the funeral." Her heart pounded. "What is it?" "The will was read early this morning." One of the aunts interjected, her voice sharp. "My brother made his intentions very clear." A pause. "You are not included." The words didn't register at first. What do you mean?" she whispered. Her mother-in-law folded her gloved hands in her lap. "My son understood his responsibilities. The estate, the properties, the company shares, they remain within the bloodline. You were provided for during the marriage." Her ears rang. "That's not possible." "He would never, he told me." "He told you many things," her brother-in-law snapped. "But the documents are clear." The baby stirred at the tension in the room, letting out a soft cry. She instinctively rocked him, her own breathing growing shallow. "I need to see the will," she said, forcing strength into her voice. "You are not entitled to anything," her mother-in-law replied coldly. "And you will vacate this house today." "Today?" Her voice cracked. "The funeral is in 3 hours." "Precisely." The cruelty was deliberate. She felt as though the floor had shifted beneath her feet. "This is my home. I lived here with my husband. My son was born here." Her mother-in-law stood. "It was my son's home. And he is gone." The words sliced through her. 2 staff members appeared at the doorway, avoiding her eyes. Boxes had already been brought in. Someone had begun packing her belongings. She stared around the room in disbelief. They had planned this. While she mourned, they had prepared her removal. "You can't do this," she whispered. But they already were. By the time the black funeral cars lined the driveway, her suitcase, half filled and carelessly zipped, sat beside the door. Rain poured harder now, bouncing off the marble steps. She had no strength left to argue. She walked outside with her baby in her arms, the rain instantly soaking through her thin shawl. The cemetery was crowded. Umbrellas bloomed like dark flowers across the gray landscape. She moved toward the entrance of the chapel, her heart pounding. Whatever they had done at the house, they could not keep her from saying goodbye. But as she reached the doors, a firm hand gripped her arm. Her brother-in-law. You will not go inside. Her entire body froze. What are you doing? Let me go. You've caused enough embarrassment, he muttered. This service is for family. I am his wife, she cried, her voice breaking. One of the aunts corrected sharply from beneath her umbrella. Gasps rippled softly through nearby guests, but no one stepped forward. She tried to pull free, but the baby began to cry loudly, startled by the sudden movement. Panic surged through her. Please, she begged, tears mixing with rain on her face. Just let me say goodbye. Please. Her mother-in-law approached slowly, her heels clicking against the wet pavement. You will not make a scene at my son's funeral. You're making the scene, she sobbed. Without warning, her brother-in-law pulled her backward. Her heels slipped on the wet stone steps, and she nearly fell, barely managing to shield the baby from impact. Pain shot through her knee as she landed hard on the ground. A collective murmur rose from the crowd, but the chapel doors opened, and then they closed again, shutting her out. She sat there in the rain, on the cold cemetery pavement, her dress soaked and clinging to her skin. Her baby wailed in her arms, his tiny fingers gripping her collar as though sensing her despair. Inside, through the stained glass windows, she could see shadows moving. The ceremony had begun. She was not part of it. The man she had loved, the man who had whispered promises into her hair at night, who had held her hand when their son was born, was being laid to rest, and she was forbidden from standing beside him. Her shoulders shook violently as the weight of it crushed her. She pressed her lips against her baby's damp forehead. I'm so sorry, she whispered to him. I'm so sorry. Rainwater pooled around her shoes. Guests passed by awkwardly, some offering sympathetic glances, others pretending not to notice. No one intervened. Time blurred. Minutes felt like hours. Eventually, the chapel doors opened again. Mourners began to file out, their faces solemn. The casket would soon be lowered into the ground. She tried once more to stand, but her legs would not cooperate. That was when she noticed a black sedan parked just beyond the cemetery gates. It hadn't been there before. The engine was running. Through the rain-streaked window, she could just make out the silhouette of a man watching her. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Then the car door opened, and he stepped out, holding a large black umbrella. The rain had softened into a steady drizzle by the time he reached her. He moved with quiet purpose, careful not to splash water onto her or the baby as he stepped across the puddled pavement. The umbrella he carried was wide and black, shielding them from the worst of the rain as he stopped a respectful distance away. Up close, he looked to be in his late 50s. Silver streaked his neatly trimmed hair. His suit was impeccably tailored, dark charcoal with a subtle pinstripe. He did not look like someone who belonged to the chaos that had just unfolded. He looked composed and certain. Mrs. Adeyemi, he said gently. The sound of her name on his lips made her stiffen. She instinctively tightened her grip on her baby. Yes. Her voice was hoarse from crying. My name is Daniel Whitmore, he said. I was your husband's friend. The word friend made something twist painfully in her chest. He doesn't have many friends I don't know. A faint, understanding smile touched his lips. That's because the kind of friendship we had required discretion. Her eyes flickered with suspicion. She had just been betrayed by people who shared her husband's blood. She was in no position to trust strangers in tailored suits. I'm not interested, she whispered. Please leave us alone. He did not move closer, nor did he retreat. Instead, he crouched slightly so that his voice would not carry beyond the cemetery gates. Your husband asked me to find you immediately after the service, he said quietly. If anything prevented you from attending, I was to approach you outside. Her heart skipped. Prevented? She repeated faintly. He anticipated resistance. Her breath caught in her throat. That's impossible, she said quickly. He wouldn't think his family would do this. Mr. Whitmore studied her face carefully before speaking again. He loved you very much, he said. Which is precisely why he did. The rain tapped softly against the umbrella above them. The baby's cries had softened into hiccuping whimpers. She swallowed. If you knew him, tell me something only he would tell a friend. Mr. Whitmore nodded once, as if he had expected that. The night your son was born, he said quietly, your husband called me at 3 a.m. He was crying so hard I could barely understand him. He kept saying, she did it. She's stronger than anyone I've ever known. Her knees nearly gave out again. He said you squeezed his hand so tightly during labor that he lost feeling in 2 fingers, Mr. Whitmore continued, a hint of warmth entering his tone. He said it was the best pain he'd ever felt. Tears spilled down her cheeks again. But these were different. That was real. No one else knew about that phone call. No one. He asked me, Mr. Whitmore added softly, to make sure you and his son were never at the mercy of anyone. The cemetery behind them had begun to empty. The casket was being lowered into the ground in the distance. She couldn't see it clearly anymore through the blur of rain and tears. What are you talking about? She whispered. Mr. Whitmore straightened slightly and gestured toward the waiting sedan beyond the gates. This is not a conversation we should have here, he said. But I assure you, what I'm about to tell you will change everything. She hesitated. Her husband's family was still scattered across the grounds. If they saw her speaking to this man, they might try to intervene. But a deeper instinct, one born from love and desperation, told her to listen. Carefully, she rose to her feet, cradling her baby close. Mr. Whitmore walked beside her, holding the umbrella over them both. Neither of them looked back. Inside the sedan, the air was warm and quiet. The driver closed the door softly behind them and pulled away from the cemetery without drawing attention. She sat stiffly in the leather seat, her baby resting against her chest, exhausted from crying. Mr. Whitmore reached into his briefcase and removed a thick cream-colored envelope. Her breath stopped. She recognized the handwriting immediately. It was her husband's. The sight of it made her fingers tremble. He wrote this 6 months ago, Mr. Whitmore said. He updated it 3 weeks before his death. She stared at the date written in the corner. 3 weeks. He had known something, or sensed it. He made certain arrangements, Mr. Whitmore continued. Extensive arrangements. Ones that were never intended to pass through the probate process his family is relying on. I don't understand, she whispered. You were told this morning that the will excluded you, he said calmly. She nodded slowly, pain flashing across her face. That document, he said carefully, is not the primary instrument of your husband's estate. Her mind struggled to keep pace. There are private holdings, he continued. Investment portfolios structured through offshore trusts. Real estate assets registered under layered entities. Liquid accounts protected by beneficiary designation. All legally established. All secured. She stared at him blankly. How much? She asked faintly. Mr. Whitmore held her gaze. Approximately $2 billion in combined investments, equity holdings, and cash reserves. The words did not land. They hovered in the air between them, unreal. That's not possible, she breathed. He ran a company, yes, but he built more than you were allowed to see, Mr. Whitmore said gently. In part because he did not trust those closest to him. A wave of shock washed over her. Why didn't he tell me? She whispered. He intended to, Mr. Whitmore replied. But he believed that if you knew the full extent of it, his family might sense the shift in control. He feared they were watching his movements. She felt cold despite the warmth of the car. They altered the public will, Mr. Whitmore continued. Or at minimum, they are presenting an outdated version. We are already investigating. Her mind flashed back to the living room that morning. The packed boxes. The rehearsed cruelty. They had known something. They think I have nothing, she murmured. Mr. Whitmore's expression hardened slightly. They are very mistaken. He placed the envelope into her shaking hands. Read it. Carefully, she broke the seal. Inside was a letter written in the familiar, steady handwriting she had watched him use 1,000 times before. Her vision blurred as she began to read. My love, if you are reading this, Then something has happened to me before I could explain everything in person. First, forgive me for the secrecy. I needed to protect you and our son from people who value power more than blood. You must not be afraid. Everything I built was for you. Not just wealth, but security, freedom. No one will ever be able to corner you, threaten you, or make you beg. Trust Daniel. He knows every detail. He will guide you through what comes next. And please remember this, you were never weak. They only mistook your kindness for it. I love you beyond this life. The letter slipped from her fingers as a sob escaped her chest. He had known. He had prepared. While she believed she was simply a wife living comfortably beside a successful man, he had been constructing a fortress around her without her knowledge. Her baby stirred, blinking up at her with wide, innocent eyes. $2 billion. Protection. Freedom. She looked at Mr. Whitmore, her tears slowly giving way to something else, something steadier. What happens now? She asked. He met her gaze without hesitation. Now, he said calmly, we make sure they regret ever leaving you in the rain. The building did not have a name on the outside. It rose from the center of the financial district like a blade of glass and steel, understated yet imposing. The sedan rolled into a private underground entrance, security gates sliding open after a brief exchange between the driver and the guard. She stepped out slowly, still holding her son, who had finally fallen asleep against her shoulder. The rain was gone here. Everything felt insulated, controlled. Mr. Whitmore guided her toward a private elevator that required a key card and fingerprint access. He pressed his thumb against the scanner. A soft beep followed. As the elevator ascended, her reflection stared back at her from mirrored walls, mascara streaked, hair damp, dress wrinkled. She looked nothing like someone who supposedly controlled billions. She looked like a widow who had been thrown out into the rain. The elevator doors opened onto a quiet, expansive floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the entire city skyline. The office was minimalist, powerful in its simplicity. Dark wood glass tables, screens displaying scrolling financial data across one wall. 3 people stood as they entered. A woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a navy suit stepped forward first. Mrs. Adeyemi. I'm Laura Chun, senior legal counsel. Next to her was a younger man with wire-framed glasses. David Morales, head of portfolio management. The third was older, reserved, holding a tablet close to his chest. Samuel Reed, Director of Trust Administration. They all looked at her not with pity, but with respect. That unsettled her more than sympathy would have. Please, Laura said gently, gesturing to a long conference table. Sit. She lowered herself into a chair, adjusting the baby carefully in her arms. Mr. Whitmore remained standing for a moment before taking the seat at the head of the table. Everything we are about to show you, he began, was established over the last 9 years. 9 years. That was nearly the entire length of their marriage. Her husband had been building something monumental beside her, and she had only seen fragments. David tapped his tablet, and the large screen on the wall shifted. A network diagram appeared. Companies branching into subsidiaries, which branched into more entities, lines connecting across continents. This, David said carefully, is the core holding structure. Her eyes scanned the screen. Energy investments in Norway. Commercial real estate in Singapore. Technology startups in California and Berlin. Agricultural holdings in Brazil. Defense contracts. Renewable infrastructure. Pharmaceutical research. Her breathing grew shallow. He diversified aggressively, David continued. But strategically. High-risk growth sectors balanced by stable international assets. Samuel stepped forward next. All of it is consolidated under an irrevocable trust. Laura leaned in slightly. A trust that names you and your son as sole beneficiaries. The word sole echoed in her mind. No board oversight, she asked faintly. Mr. Whitmore shook his head. The trust cannot be altered without your authorization. Not by his family. Not by shareholders. Not by anyone. Her fingers tightened around her son's blanket. They told me I had nothing, she whispered. Laura's jaw hardened. They were counting on your ignorance of this structure. A new document appeared on the screen. A scanned copy of the public will presented that morning. We obtained a copy an hour ago, Laura said. This is the version they intend to file. Her eyes scanned the page. The signature at the bottom looked like her husband's, but something felt wrong. The date, she murmured. Exactly, Laura replied. It predates the trust by nearly 5 years. They're using an outdated will? She asked. Either outdated, Laura said carefully, or intentionally substituted. Silence fell over the room. Her husband had suspected this. He had anticipated betrayal so deeply that he constructed an entire financial fortress outside their reach. Why didn't he fight them openly? She asked. Mr. Whitmore answered quietly. Because open conflict would have alerted them. And because he hoped, until the end, that blood would behave like blood. The baby shifted, stretching tiny fingers against her chest. Samuel stepped closer and placed a slim leather folder in front of her. These, he said, are your authorization documents. Her eyes widened. Now, you are legally the controlling principal of this trust, Samuel replied. Effective immediately upon his passing. Her hand hovered over the folder. She had never run a company. Never negotiated contracts worth millions, let alone billions. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. David gave a small, reassuring smile. You don't need to know everything today. You have a full team. What matters is that the authority is yours. Mr. Whitmore studied her carefully. Your husband did not build this because he doubted your strength, he said. He built it because he believed in it. She looked up sharply. He told me once, Mr. Whitmore continued, that you see people clearly, that you know when someone is lying, that you understand loyalty. Her mind flashed back to the living room that morning, the rehearsed coldness, the swift packing of her belongings. Yes, she said quietly. I do. Laura folded her hands on the table. There's more. Another screen appeared. A list of transactions. Attempted transfers. Emergency board motions filed by her brother-in-law. They began making moves within hours of his death, Laura said. They assumed control through the public-facing company shares. They're trying to liquidate assets, David added. Fast. Her pulse quickened. If we do nothing, Laura said, they will siphon significant value before litigation freezes them. The air in the room shifted. For the first time since the funeral, the fog inside her mind began to clear. They dragged me out in the rain, she said slowly, because they thought I was powerless. No one contradicted her. She looked down at her son. He deserved more than survival. He deserved protection. She straightened in her chair. What do you need from me? She asked. Mr. Whitmore didn't smile, but something approving flickered in his eyes. Your signature, he said, to initiate injunction proceedings, to freeze contested assets, to challenge the validity of the filed will. Laura slid a pen across the table. It felt heavier than it should have. For a brief moment, fear crept back in. If she signed, there would be no quiet resolution, no reconciliation. It would become war. She thought of the cemetery doors closing, of her knees hitting wet stone, of her son crying in her arms while strangers watched. Her hand steadied. She signed. The sound of pen against paper echoed softly in the silent room. Samuel immediately collected the documents. David began typing instructions. Laura was already drafting filings on her tablet. The machine had started moving, and she was at its center. Mr. Whitmore remained seated for a moment longer. There will be backlash, he warned gently. They will threaten you. They may attempt public smears. They will not surrender quietly. She met his gaze evenly now. They already showed me their worst, she said. Outside the glass walls, the clouds were breaking apart. Thin strands of sunlight began to slip between skyscrapers, reflecting gold across the city. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt something unfamiliar rise inside her. Not grief. Not fear. Resolve. Her husband had built an empire in silence. Now she would defend it in the open. And this time, she would not be standing in the rain. The first headline broke 48 hours later. Internal dispute erupts over late CEO's estate. By the end of the day, 3 more followed. Her brother-in-law had underestimated 2 things: the legal precision of the trust her husband built, and her willingness to fight. In the glass conference room overlooking the city, Laura stood at the head of the table, remote in hand, as multiple news outlets flashed across the screen. "They've responded," Laura said calmly. Publicly, the clip began to play. Her brother-in-law stood on the steps of the family's corporate headquarters, dressed in a dark suit, face arranged in solemn indignation. "Our family is deeply saddened," he said to reporters. "Unfortunately, certain individuals are attempting to exploit this tragedy for financial gain." The implication was deliberate. She watched the broadcast without flinching. "They're painting you as opportunistic," David muttered. She gave a quiet, almost humorless smile. "Of course they are." Laura clicked off the screen. "That won't hold for long." On the table before them lay evidence: bank transfer attempts flagged and blocked, internal emails recovered through emergency disclosure motions, and most damning of all, a forensic review of the will submitted to probate court. The signature page. "It's a composite," Laura said, sliding printed documents across the table. "The signature is authentic, but the page beneath it is not." She looked up sharply. "They forged the content?" "Not the signature itself," Laura clarified. "They removed it from a prior document and attached it to a revised will. A calculated manipulation. Legal on the surface. Criminal beneath it." Samuel leaned forward. "We've filed for immediate injunction. The court hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning." Tomorrow. Everything was accelerating. The courtroom was colder than she expected. Not physically, but emotionally. Her husband's family sat across the aisle, their expressions carved from defiance and outrage. Her mother-in-law did not look at her. Her brother-in-law did. There was venom in his stare. She held her son in her arms as she took her seat beside Laura. She had chosen to bring him deliberately. Let them remember who they tried to discard. The judge entered. The room rose. Laura stood first. "Your Honor," she began, voice steady and precise, "we are requesting an emergency freeze of all estate-related transfers pending investigation into fraudulent documentation submitted by the opposing party." Her brother-in-law's attorney stood swiftly. "These are baseless accusations fueled by greed." Laura didn't react. She approached the bench and handed over the forensic report. "Page 7, she said calmly. The judge adjusted his glasses, scanning. Silence stretched across the courtroom. Her heart beat steadily, not wildly like before. "Steady." The judge looked up. "This is a serious allegation," he said, directing his gaze toward her brother-in-law's counsel. "Do you contest the forensic findings?" The opposing attorney hesitated, just briefly. That hesitation was enough. "We request time to review." "You've had access to the same documents for 12 hours, Laura replied sharply. Her brother-in-law shifted in his seat. The judge's expression darkened. "Pending full investigation, all contested assets are hereby frozen." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. "And," the judge continued, "if this court finds evidence of deliberate fraud, criminal referrals will follow." Her mother-in-law's composure cracked for the first time. She turned slowly toward her son, whispering harshly. But it was too late. The investigation moved quickly after that. Bank surveillance records showed her brother-in-law meeting privately with the attorney who drafted the altered will, 2 days before it was submitted. Emails revealed internal discussions about containing her before she learned the truth. Even more damning was a recorded phone call obtained through subpoena. Her brother-in-law's voice, impatient and irritated. "She doesn't even know how the company works. Once the funeral is done, she'll disappear." The arrogance of it burned, but it also strengthened her resolve. They had never seen her clearly, and that blindness would cost them everything. The second court appearance was not as composed. This time, reporters packed the gallery. Cameras waited outside. When the evidence was presented in full, the courtroom felt electric. Laura moved with controlled precision, presenting financial trails, authentication analyses, timestamp discrepancies. Then came the final blow. The original will, Laura said, holding up a leather-bound document retrieved from a secure vault Mr. Whitmore had arranged years ago. The real one, dated properly, structured differently, naming her and her son not as dependents, but as primary heirs. The judge examined it carefully. Her brother-in-law's face had gone pale. This court finds sufficient evidence of intentional misrepresentation, the judge announced firmly. The submitted will is invalid pending criminal review. A sharp inhale moved through the room. Furthermore, the judge continued, temporary control of all corporate and estate holdings remains with Mrs. Adeyemi as designated by the irrevocable trust. Control. Publicly recognized. Legally sealed. Her brother-in-law shot to his feet. This is outrageous. Sit down, the judge snapped. For the first time since the funeral, she saw something she had not seen before in him. Fear. The consequences unraveled swiftly after that. Regulatory agencies launched independent investigations into financial misconduct within the company's executive branch. Board members distanced themselves from her husband's family to protect their own reputations. Stock prices, which had dipped during the uncertainty, stabilized once official statements confirmed rightful leadership. And then came the criminal charges. Forgery. Fraud. Attempted asset misappropriation. Her brother-in-law was escorted out of the corporate headquarters by federal officers just 1 week after the funeral. The image flooded every major news outlet. The same man who had dragged her from the chapel steps now shielded his face from cameras. Her mother-in-law retreated from public view entirely. The mansion, the one she had been forced out of, was legally restored to her possession. She stood at its gates days later, staring up at its towering facade. Memories flickered through her mind. Laughter in the halls, quiet evenings on the balcony, the nursery they had painted together. Mr. Whitmore stood beside her. "It's yours again," he said softly. She studied the house for a long moment. Then she shook her head. "No," she replied. He glanced at her. "I won't live somewhere that echoes with betrayal." Within a month, the mansion was sold. The proceeds were redirected into expansion of the trust's philanthropic arm. Not out of sentiment, but intention. The final courtroom appearance was brief. Her brother-in-law avoided her eyes as sentencing was handed down. Financial penalties. Disqualification from executive leadership. Ongoing criminal proceedings. He had gambled everything on her silence. And lost. As she exited the courthouse, reporters surged forward. "Do you have any statement for the family?" one shouted. She paused. For a moment, the rain began again, light, almost symbolic. Cameras flashed. She adjusted her son on her hip and looked directly ahead. "I was never their enemy," she said calmly. "I was their excuse." And then she walked down the steps. Not dragged. Not broken. Not begging. But standing taller than anyone who had once tried to force her into the storm. The new house did not try to impress anyone. It sat on a quiet stretch of land overlooking the water, wrapped in glass and light instead of marble and gates. There were no towering pillars. No ancestral portraits lining the walls. No echoes of whispered conspiracies in long hallways. It was open, breathable, alive. The first morning she woke there, sunlight poured through sheer curtains and spilled across wooden floors. For a moment, she lay still listening. No raised voices. No tension coiled beneath silence. Just the distant sound of waves and the soft babbling of her son from the nursery down the hall. She rose and walked barefoot to him. He was standing in his crib now, tiny hands gripping the railing, eyes bright and curious. When he saw her, his entire face lit up. "Mama," he babbled. The word wrapped around her heart. She lifted him into her arms, inhaling the warm scent of his skin. And for the first time since the funeral, she felt something stronger than survival. She felt peace. The foundation was launched 6 months later. It bore her husband's name, not in gold-plated letters, but etched modestly into the glass entrance of a downtown building that had once housed one of his early investments. The Adeyemi Initiative for Family Equity and Protection. Its mission was simple but radical. provide legal defense, financial education, and emergency funding to widows, single mothers, and spouses pushed aside by powerful families and corporate systems. At the inaugural press conference, cameras flashed again, but this time, she stood at the podium by choice. "I know what it feels like," she said steadily, "to be told you are powerless while everything is taken from you. I know what it feels like to grieve and fight at the same time." She paused, scanning the room. This foundation exists so that no woman has to choose between mourning her partner and defending her survival. Behind her sat a legal team assembled specifically for pro bono estate disputes. Financial advisors prepared to teach wealth literacy workshops. Emergency housing grants had already been approved for 12 families. She was no longer reacting. She was building. Her role in the company evolved naturally. At first, she attended meetings quietly, listening more than speaking. She absorbed language she had once found intimidating: equity distribution, cross-border taxation, acquisition strategy. But she had always possessed something more valuable than technical knowledge. She understood people. During one executive session, a senior partner attempted to obscure a high-risk proposal beneath layers of polished language. She interrupted him gently. "What aren't you saying?" The room went still. He hesitated, and that hesitation told her everything. Later, David would admit privately, "He underestimated you." She smiled faintly. They all did. Under her leadership, the company shifted focus. Less speculative expansion, more sustainable infrastructure, increased investment in renewable energy and community development projects. Profit margins remained strong, but so did ethical oversight. She refused to build empires that mirrored the cruelty she had escaped. Years passed, not in a blur, but in deliberate, intentional steps. Her son grew quickly, from a toddler racing across polished floors to a thoughtful boy who asked difficult questions at bedtime. One rainy afternoon, soft and steady, like the day everything changed, he stood beside the wide living room window, watching droplets slide down the glass. "Did it rain when Daddy died?" he asked quietly. She froze for just a moment. Children sensed more than they were told. "Yes," she answered honestly, kneeling beside him. "It did." He turned to look at her. "Were you scared?" She considered the question carefully. "Yes," she said again. "But being scared doesn't mean you're weak." He studied that. "Grandma at school says storms help things grow," he added thoughtfully. A small smile touched her lips. "She's right." She lifted him into her lap, wrapping her arms around him as they watched the rain together. "Your father loved you before you were even born," she said softly. "He worked very hard to make sure you would always have choices, that no one could decide your future for you." "Did he know I would like robots?" her son asked seriously. She laughed, a clear, unburdened sound. "He knew you would like building things." Her gaze drifted toward the water beyond the window. "And he knew you would be strong." On the 5th anniversary of her husband's passing, she returned to the cemetery. This time, there were no gates closed against her, no hands dragging her backward. She walked freely across the grass, her son holding her hand. The headstone was simple, dignified. She knelt, brushing away a few fallen leaves. "I kept my promise," she whispered softly. Her son placed a small drawing beside the stone, stick figures holding hands under a bright sun. Not rain. Sun. She felt no bitterness standing there. The anger had burned away long ago, replaced by something steadier. Understanding. Her husband had not left her wealth merely to shield her. He had left her responsibility, and she had risen to meet it. That evening, as another gentle rain began to fall, she stood once more by a window, but this time in a home filled with warmth and laughter. Her son was building a mechanical toy on the floor, humming to himself. The foundation had expanded internationally. The company had reached record stability, and the fear that once lived in her chest had been replaced by confidence earned, not inherited. Rain traced soft lines down the glass. She did not flinch at the sound anymore. Storms no longer symbolized loss. They reminded her of the day she was pushed into the cold, and discovered she carried fire within her all along. Behind her, Her son looked up. Mama? Yes. Are we safe? She turned fully toward him. Yes, she said, her voice calm and certain. We are more than safe. And as the rain continued to fall, it no longer washed anything away. It nourished what had grown in its wake. Finally, we have come to the end of this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Do well to like and subscribe to my channel for more interesting stories.